Welcome to the Leslie Monday Podcast, a show for lovers of all things science fiction in books, TV, and movies. Each week, we'll review something new or dive into an old favorite. So come join me. I'm Leslie, and it's Monday. Hello, and welcome to the Leslie Monday Podcast. I'm Leslie, and today we have a special episode. We've got a different thing going on here, because today Patrick is here with me, and we are going to review episodes 3 and 4 of WandaVision. Hey Patrick, how are you?
Yes. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm good. This is exciting and different. Is it weird to be over here and not in charge over there at Critics Not Cynics?
Yes and no. It's weird not to, be organizing everything on my own and getting everything set up and prepared. But I will say that I like not having to worry about anything after we're done talking. So I don't have to worry about editing and getting it uploaded or anything. So it's going to be nice to kind of take the back seat in this one.
Yeah, you kind of get a bit of a break this weekend for that.
A little bit. I think we are recording an episode, or at least I will individually be recording an episode later this weekend as a recording. But yeah, at least for this one, it's going to be a little nice relaxation.
So, WandaVision. If everybody's watched the episodes, we're going to do episodes 3 and 4. We always let you know spoilers because we're going to talk about them in full. We kind of just wanted to give our brief thoughts on episode 3 because I'm obsessed with episode 4 and it's pretty much all that's in my mind. I jotted down notes so I would remember what happened in episode 3 versus what was 4 because I was sucked in last night watching that episode, and I must have watched it 3 times because I wanted to watch it with nothing, and then watch it and try and take notes, and then watch it again to see what I missed while I was taking notes. How about you?
I've actually only seen it the one time. So if I miss anything, I will defer to you in that case in episode 4. But I know I did have one moment because I was watching it, but I also had the dog outside, and it was when she's walking into Sword, and I saw the TVs, and so I wanted to hit pause because I wanted to see what was on the chyrons and everything on the televisions. I ended up hitting the home button on my Fire remote, and then I yelled at myself because I'm like, no, that's not what I wanted to do. So then I had to go back into Disney Plus, and then I had to get back to where I was. But yeah, I watched it the one time, but I think I was watching it with a very analytical perspective because I had seen some teaser stuff prior to the episode releasing and knew that we were getting kind of an outside perspective. So I knew that this one would be fairly jam-packed with probably everything that everybody has complained about the first 2 or 3 episodes not having.
Yeah. So episode 3, I'll just give you my quick highlights just because, like I said, I was obsessed with last night's episode more. Quick highlight for me, that edit when Vision kind of jumps a little bit, that was amazing to me because literally myself and every reactor I then watched were all did something just happen to my streaming service? We thought it was, the first initial thought you have is, did that just blip? What happened? And that was perfect. I loved that edit. What did you think?
Yeah, I got to kind of remember back to it because I have not rewatched it. But one of the things, not so much on that edit, that kind of just stuck out to me, especially when you see it in context of episode 4, is just the whole Geraldine wrap-up of her being there and then Vision walking back in and she's gone, but we have no idea. Obviously, by the end of the episode, she's kind of out of whatever they're in. But also kind of you see the shifting of the aspect ratio. So it's kind of now breaking that fourth wall of the old style television shows.
Yeah, I really liked it when the aspect ratio went out like that. I was like, oh, that's so
Yeah.
cool. That's so cool. One of my biggest questions from that episode is wondering if the babies, if Tommy and Billy are real, or if she manifested them. And then my thoughts around that are: is she powerful enough to physically manifest these two children, or were they already children, that were already in that town? Or did she transport them in? Because
Um,
my wondering is, if she can manifest them, can she bring Vision back?
so, knowing a little bit about the House of M storyline, having read it, of course, it's been years since I've read it, and I actually, because of WandaVision, I want to go back and reread it. I know that the names of the children are the names of her actual children in the comics of Wiccan, and I can't remember the other son, who's kind of got speed powers like Quicksilver. Um, and if I remember correctly, like she does have that power to actually manifest it, but it doesn't necessarily make it real. So the question still kind of comes down to: are they real or
Mm-hmm.
are they fabrications?
Yeah.
Because she could still technically like continue the illusion that they are real if she wanted to, but also kind of with the whole quickness and the pregnancy and then the birth, which I thought it was really funny context because that's kind of that classic old story trope. If someone has some type of powers and then they're going through some type of emotional stress, everything's going wackadoodle.
Yeah.
Um, but we kind of get hints in, and not to jump too far ahead, and like you said, we're talking spoilers here. We get a breaking of that reality in episode 4 when we're kind of rehashing the end of episode 3, and she sees Vision as he is,
Mm-hmm.
and he is not alive. And this also kind of is interesting given the details released by Feige that there was a post-credit scene for Endgame that was to show her getting his body, essentially, which would have set this up. And I think that that's kind of what I had talked about on the Critics Not Cynics podcast, of how they should have probably started out episode 1 is doing something like that, or having her go to bed and then waking up in that reality, instead of just jumping straight into it, because you're not adequately setting up the story right. So I can understand when people are watching at least the first 3 episodes and they're feeling a little lost and they're feeling a little confused and they're not fans of old pop culture type shows, and they're not even familiar with the House of M storyline, that might be why they have such a hard time understanding what's going on or trying to look at it from a different perspective. And I think, as I texted you right after I watched episode 4, I was like, this is the episode that I think people's complaints will start going away.
Yeah.
And if you are a listener who stopped after episode 1 and 2, now would probably be the best time if you want to get back into it, because now you're given more context by episode 4.
Yeah, I think episode 4, we can just jump straight to it, but it's definitely, like, I think they gauged well enough that they could only do 3 episodes of the sitcom thing before
Yeah.
getting into the really the meat of what's going on. Because I was getting, in episode 3, I was just right on that fence of like, okay, I'm a little bit bored with this. I need a little more
Same.
information. And so when we got episode 4, I mean, from the very beginning, when we have Monica just coming back from the snap, I was like pulled in, sucked in. I'm like glued to the screen. This
Yeah.
is amazing. I loved it. I loved the fact that we see a piece of what's happening after the snap. It's not just all like, oh my God, you're back, and cheers and hurrah. But like, this was a terrible situation for that hospital, with all these people just randomly coming back. And were they coming back with like the injuries they left with? Or were they just
I mean,
manifesting back?
as far as we know, they came back the same way, that like it was instantaneous for them, because obviously, like with her, she has no concept of any time having passed. And
Yeah.
when the doctor's explaining to her how it's been 5 years, that's where you got to go, like, and that's kind of where the problem comes into with the snap returning. Because if you think of, and not to like think too hard about it, but people that were flying, that
Yeah.
were snapped.
I was just
like,
about to ask
do they
that.
just do they rematerialize in thin air, or is by Hulk bringing them back, at least bringing them back to safety? Like maybe geographically they're not in the air, but they are where they were in the air on the ground. Something like that.
Yeah, I would hope that he'd be able to influence it somehow like that. Like, what about guys in the Navy? What if their submarine wasn't there? And are they just in the ocean right. that far under?
Exactly. So that does kind of complicate it a little bit. Or you can maybe even further say, well, no one that was on a plane disappeared. Because also you got to think, well, if a pilot disappeared, or even both pilots disappeared, that plane crashes and everyone dies.
Well, so, what about the astronauts on the ISS? Like, if the ISS isn't exactly where it was, are they just in low orbit?
Right, and that's just like when you get kind of going that far, you end up overthinking it too much.
Yeah,
and, we're overthinking a comic book show and stuff like that. But
it's fun to think
really
about,
like
though.
That. I like. Yes, and I really did like that it picked up with her being like right there in the hospital and trying to figure out what's going on with her mother, and like not having this idea. So I would think that anyone that was in post-op surgery or anything like that, they're going to come back with the same conditions or same scars. Nothing's going to necessarily be healed from the 5 years. But it was a great way, because I remember you asked me after last week, like, were we going to record episode 3?
Yeah.
And I said, no, let's wait and do episode 3 and 4, because I think 4 is going to be a huge episode. And I agree with you. And this kind of also, I wanted to touch base on this, because everyone loves The Mandalorian. Well, not everyone, but pretty much everyone loves The Mandalorian. But I remember when The Mandalorian started out, even though it was good, those kind of first 3 episodes were not necessarily like fast moving and plot heavy or anything like that. It was a little bit of a slow churn, and then once you got to about episode 4, things really picked up, and they managed to keep that momentum into season 2. So I want to say, like, they're approaching WandaVision almost in the same way. Like, I agree with you. Episode 3 had me start going, all right, I can only take the sitcom, like this type of the sitcom stuff, so much.
Yeah.
But I need to start getting more pieces. And once you got to the end of the episode 3 and then the start of episode 4, you're like, okay, this is perfect. This was the perfect time to gauge it. Now you're going into about the second half of your season, and you've got more plot details, more story details. We kind of have an idea of who the villain is, even if they're not a true villain. And we see some returning characters that I was really happy to finally see.
I loved the returning characters.
Yes, and although I love her character, I do find it, and this is the problem with her only showing up the last time showing up was Thor 2, Darcy.
Darcy, yeah.
Because when you get introduced to Darcy and Thor, like, she's not a scientist per se. There's even a line, she says, well, I'm a political science major, not a physicist major or anything like that. And by the time we get now here to WandaVision, she's like full-blown, intelligent, smart physicist. And, like, I don't have a necessarily issue with that. It's just we haven't seen her character in so long that seems like just a huge leap, even though it's probably only a short amount of time. But I did like her returning. I did like that
Agent Wu
revealed that she was the person. and Agent Wu. I was going to get there. But that she's the person that was watching the TV episode at the end of episode 1.
Yeah.
I did like that touched base on that. But yes, Randall Park, fake Jim, showing up, back as Jimmy Woo. I loved it.
I love him.
He's just such a funny guy that anytime I see him in anything, he's great. And I do have to wonder, I saw some speculation before we got online, who his person is that he's like looking for. And I don't want it to be who they speculated it being, either Ant-Man or Hawkeye. I feel like that kind of cheapens it. Although I could see Hawkeye, since he was such a like prominent influence on Scarlet Witch, being someone that's there. But I don't know if I like that. But I did like his return. I did like his interactions with Darcy, especially the sequence when they were watching the baby scene,
and
and
eating the
like she's
chips.
like, "You want some?" And then because like even though it's very cliche and I knew what was going to happen, I loved it anyways. So
Yeah,
their interplay was fantastic.
yeah, his acting is so good because there's like a genuineness to even just his face and his facial acting,
Yeah,
and I'm just like I just believe it, and even if that's not how
yeah.
he is like in person, but if I met the character of Jimmy Woo, I would just believe it. I'm just like you're just such a nice person. I just want to be friends with you. And you see him do the card trick? Ant Man showed him
Absolutely.
the card trick when he's pulling out
Yeah.
his ID. So
Yes,
funny.
it was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I
But
liked
yeah,
that.
it's
Well,
it's go ahead.
sorry. I liked that
No, you're
we had Maria, her picture on the sword wall when Monica's going in, and they gave her call sign Photon because I assume that
yes.
we're gonna try and build up Monica because Monica that like Photon was one of her names because I think she was Captain Marvel for a bit and then she was Photon and I think she was something else because I do have a Captain Marvel comic that she is in and I believe she's Photon in that comic.
Yeah, I'm not too like familiar with her character outside of kind of information you filled me in on. I have back when I was collecting comics, I was picking up the Captain Marvel relaunch with Kelly Sue DeConnick on it, and of course, unfortunately, like that was right around the time I did stop collecting. So even if she got introduced in that later line, I wasn't necessarily aware of it. But I do like that. It is tying Captain Marvel more into the MCU. Not that it didn't feel like it was connected prior, but like now we're seeing kind of the ramifications of what came out of Captain Marvel because we can believe that the creation of Sword was really kind of due to the Kree and becoming its own thing and kind of looking at more of the space side of things, whereas Shield was more kind of earthbound. So I do like that it's tied all that together, and we're seeing a grown-up Monica and the greater impact that she will have maybe in Captain Marvel 2, or if I'm not sure if she's cast in it, but I don't see why she wouldn't unless it's another kind of period piece of the 90s. But I did like that it was tying in some of these characters, even though she's probably not necessarily like that tied to a WandaVision type story, but it's showing that greater interconnectedness of that cinematic universe.
Yeah, and we can pause here just for a second because I have something, and I just wanted to hear your thoughts on it. But like this kind of like you're talking about the interconnected universe is kind of what a lot of us watching Agents of Shield when it first came out and the Netflix shows like desperately wanted. And Feige was either
Yes.
he just didn't like what's his name, I can't remember off the
Jeff
top
Loeb.
Jeff Loeb
Yeah.
off the top of my head. Either he just didn't like him, or I also that saw comments that he just had this like I don't know the right word I'm looking for, but kind of like this elitist attitude to like I only do movies, I don't do television, sort of a pretentiousness that but this interconnectedness and getting to see these little characters because like Jimmy's not a huge character in Ant-Man, but we love him. Coulson didn't start out as a huge character in
Yeah.
Iron Man, but we love him. And I love being able to see these other little side characters going off and doing things and meeting up and then going and having other adventures. And like this is desperately what we wanted. And now I feel like we're finally kind of getting it. And maybe 2020 has kind of shown him and with the Marvel thing that you're going to have to kind of do television and get over the little whatever sneering it was that you had about it. But I've heard that they might bring those other shows back in. I just don't know how I feel about it because I don't know if I just want him to go
Yeah.
clean
So
forward or try and hack things in. What are your thoughts?
So, yes, as much as like I really appreciate Feige and his vision and like kind of having this foresight of seeing where this can go 10 years down the road, um, I did think he did kind of have an elitist attitude because like he was the movies are my thing. I don't care about the television show because it's that old school Hollywood mentality that like if you're a big name, you don't do television. Like it was once like Kiefer Sutherland was like going and doing 24, and some of these other big actors started kind of gracing the small screen, did television start becoming a serious role for a lot of these actors, and kind of that elitist mentality went away. But I think still it was ingrained in some of the old Hollywood stuff that once streaming platforms were really introduced, and you could start using about what would be a movie's budget and actually break it up into probably 6 or 13 episodes, you could still do high quality programming. And I think that that's what Feige is kind of sensing now, especially with the launch of Disney Plus and their kind of experiment with The Mandalorian. That, okay, we can tell these grand stories over a series of episodes. We can break up the action with episodes of exposition, and we can still tell high action packed stories or something to that extent, and explore some of these lesser known areas of the universe that we as fans do want to see. And so I think he did kind of finally start getting, seeing where the wind was shifting, and especially with 2020 being as shit of a year as it has been, that it was like, okay, this is kind of, and like I've always been saying for the past few years now, just seeing with this success, even though it's probably now in a decline, of the Arrowverse on CW, where they were telling these stories and getting these characters in there, and being able to look at the finer details. So I really do think that he's adapted, and I do also think that, like, now that there really is no Marvel ABC television program studio anymore, and he has complete control, and he doesn't have to deal with Jeff Loeb anymore, that he's more like, okay, this is my thing. As for the Netflix characters, there is one thing I will say, that they never fully established the timeline for those shows. And I think I've even talked to you about this, where it was in, I believe, Luke Cage season 2. They're referencing This Is Us, but like only the first Avengers movie has happened, which predates This Is Us, being on there. And there's been no like references to the Sokovia incident, to basically the Civil War or Age of Ultron. So if they can approach it that those shows took all place like maybe a year after Avengers, then they can actually integrate those characters into the shows. Because like, although I have no idea what's going on with Spider-Man 3, because they're taking it in a direction that I probably would have saved for Spider-Man 4, given the end of Spider-Man Far From Home. I would have set up Spider-Man 3 to be basically a court drama with Charlie Cox coming in as Matt Murdock and defending him, and then seeing his Daredevil on the big screen. I think that there is a way, because they are now getting the rights back. The Netflix shows have kind of now been given up, so like now they're in the sense of they've reverted back to Marvel, so Marvel can do kind of what they want with them. Not that they gave the rights completely to Netflix, but Netflix has just had kind of a period of time where they were on top of it, and they couldn't do anything with those characters until that time limit was up. That's kind of where that is at this moment.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with all of that, and I had a couple of other thoughts, just things that popped up in my head as you were talking. Was just, number one, what I wouldn't give to see them just integrate May or Daisy, or Mac or somebody, just to give them a cameo. I would just love that, just one of those. Please, I would just love to see that. And then I was also just thinking about when you were talking about back in the day, before like Kiefer Sutherland started doing 24 and things like that, how the difference in attitude between when you're doing a movie and when you're doing television kind of reminds me of like this difference in attitude between, you're not a real artist unless you're the starving artist, and struggling. So I'm only an artist because I do these big movie things, and they're either like art projects of some sort, or it's big budgets, and so I have this fancy well-known name, versus like maybe maybe the TV cop drama actor who's in every freaking cop and law show, but you know what? He has a job and he has it for a long time. So there's a difference between being able to have this job and pay your bills and and have this every day versus, oh, but I'm not the elite, floofy whatever doing this movie project. And that difference in attitude about things, I mean, whether it's about movies or, again, like you're the starving artist or you're the person who has their day job who paints on the side when you can, and how people view that differently, even how they might view you and I who have a day job and try and do this on the side. Like, well, you're not really committed if you don't quit your job and give up everything you own and go to do the podcast 24/7. But I think you really need to, like, ply your passions, with taking care of yourself, because you have to live in this world. And that's just something that kind of came into my mind. Doesn't really have that much to do with Marvel or WandaVision, but it's just thoughts that were coming in my mind as I was listening to you talk.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where I think, like, back in the day, it was looked down upon, like you weren't a serious actor, and that you just couldn't take television as a serious job, like you're not a serious actor. And like you said, it's this thing of like, well, they actually have a job. Their job actually is not just one movie, and then they're maybe don't get cast in any other roles down the road. But it is just like, it's one where it's more of a consistent job and everything like that. And I always kind of feel bad, like when a television show, even if it's good or if it's bad, if it's canceled after one season, and like some people who even like shows that I might not like don't necessarily feel great celebrating that they get canceled, because now all those people are out of a job. And I say the same thing like with these movies that get made that people just absolutely hate. Transformers movies, for example. They're not widely like accepted as, and I don't say it's high cinema,
right.
It's just one of those things where it's like, it's a movie I can turn my brain off to and enjoy. But when you, kind of say, hey, stop seeing these movies so they'll stop making them. Well, now you've got not just actors, like, and everyone just thinks about the actors,
right,
maybe the director, but no one thinks about key grip or set design or costumers. And although, the film industry is always kind of constantly churning out stuff, that doesn't mean that those same people work on the same, on those 10 other different movies that are being made at the same time. So I really, think that, like, honestly, all levels, whether it's basic theater, television, movies, streaming shows, like, it's one of those things where I think, like, all of them have their own level of credibility. And thinking of a particular argument that was made that this one guy who had kind of his own fall of grace on YouTube and everything, and now he's kind of back on his rise. He watches these Netflix original movies, and he's like, yeah, but no one really screens these movies and say, nah, you need to trim it down, or nah, we're not going to do this. They just go ahead and turn it out. Well, okay, but that doesn't, just because you didn't like it or you thought it was complete crap, doesn't mean that some other people might actually enjoy it, or just even enjoy seeing the particular actors that are in the film. One of the biggest ones I can think of is Extraction. That one got kind of panned, but I watched it, my parents watched it, we all really enjoyed it, and the Russo brothers are talking about doing more movies in that kind of series. And just because it came out straight to Netflix, I don't think that makes it any less credible than those that are released in theaters.
Yeah, I agree. So let's segue back to WandaVision. I had one more question while I was watching episode 4. When we're seeing what actually took place with Wanda and Geraldine, or Monica, as we know. Of course, if you didn't already know that was Monica, you found out this episode pretty much. But after we see her shoot her out of the sky and into Westview, or just outside of Westview, we see that hole, she fixes it, and then Vision, as soon as he walks in, is dead Vision. He doesn't like change. You can kind of see it in the background. You just get to see it clearer, when she turns around and looks at him. And then the way that he's talking, I can't decide if I think that it's a part of her consciousness, like of her love that was Vision that created this, or if that's actually a piece of Vision's consciousness that she like somehow took while she was quote unquote killing him the first time. I'm not sure what I think. What do you think?
I kind of think that it's a little mixture of both, and kind of why I think that is going back to just even Age of Ultron, where he's singing the "I've Got No Strings Attached to Me" song, from Pinocchio.
Yeah.
That yeah, she's kind of resurrected maybe a bit of his subconscious, but because enough that when he sees oh, I'm gonna get his name wrong. Is it Herb? Herb and Agnes,
Yeah.
like talking, and they're talking about Geraldine in episode 3, and he notices something. Especially, he notices something's off when Herb is using the weed whacker to cut through the the stone fence, and so he is starting to kind of become self-aware. So I think like part of his subconscious is fighting through this reality that she has made, but it's not enough that he could actually become, at least at the moment, self-aware. I do believe that by the end of the season, either we're going to get a definitive Vision is back or dead, like straight up dead. So it's going to be one of those things where I think that's still going to be part of the mystery. How much of Vision is Vision there, and how much of it is her? And even then, we still like I truly believe that Wanda is responsible for everything currently going on. But there are still kind of some speculation that there might be this other villain that's involved. And I really don't think so, because I feel like, because this was kind of the speculation for how Doctor Strange was going to turn out, that she was going to go to him by the end of that movie or during that movie for training. Because we are getting the true Scarlet Witch at this point. I think we talked about it on Critics Not Cynics, but prior to basically Disney getting all the rights back from Fox, they couldn't, because they were getting a Quicksilver in Days of Future Past, and Quicksilver in Age of Ultron, and so they couldn't be mutants, and they couldn't be the children of Magneto. So they really only kind of stuck with her kind of telekinetic powers when they were, showing her in Age of Ultron. A little bit of the manipulation, because she does that with Tony and with each of the Avengers, but not to the level we're seeing currently in WandaVision. And then when we see her in Civil War, it's still just kind of basic telekinetics, and then same in Endgame and Infinity War. So I really feel like the whole kind of premise or the end game of this season or this show is that she kind of let her powers go rampant. And now she's created this kind of quote unquote perfect reality for her and Vision, and she doesn't want, like, because that is what kind of disrupts her conversation with Geraldine / Monica, is Monica brings in the real world. She mentions Pietro, she mentions Ultron, and that's really where we see finally the phrase. And she starts, coming to her own senses, and that's why the veil drops on Vision, and we see that Vision is still crushed head Vision. That, okay, she did this. We don't know why she did this or how it started, which I'm assuming we'll get by the end of the season. But that it ultimately translates to her having to go to Doctor Strange, and Doctor Strange and, what is it, the Madness of the Multiverse, or whatever the convoluted title is, and get some additional training from him on how to really control these world-altering powers. Because even they said, like, the shape of basically this bubble is hexagon. Hexagonal. Right. Yeah. Which is kind of still fits with some of the symbols we see with, like, when Doctor Strange is doing his stuff, and seems more kind of like spell related and stuff like that. So I'm very, very intrigued to see if she is the sole villain, or if there is this third party. But I'm currently in the camp of this is Wanda, especially with having the background of House of M.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure if I think it's strictly only Wanda. I definitely think that she's like 70-80% of it, like a significant portion, but I don't know if she's it totally because I don't know what precipitated this event. So, I want to see what happened that precipitated her needing to do this, and well, when we get to at the beginning of the episode, we're kind of getting the timeline of what's happened, right? Because we know that Bruce snapped everybody back in Endgame. And so we start with Monica being snapped back, and then when she goes to Sword, he says it's like what, like 3-4 weeks later, something like that. So we're seeing that this is maybe a month after the end of Endgame, which I'm assuming they've already done Tony's funeral, which is the last time that we saw Wanda talking to Clint. So I need to know what happened between there and the beginning of this, where she, started this, whatever you want to call it, world altering, alternate reality, wormhole thing, or whatever that she's done in Westview. I need to know what happened in between there, those few weeks. Like, did she just really get succumbed to her grief? Because she looked kind of okay, like, at Tony's funeral. She didn't look like she was grieving and off the edge, like, so distraught. So I need to kind of know in between there what happened to her. Was it just the, like you said, getting Vision's body? Is that what kicked her over the edge? Just seeing him, like, dead, laying there, with that thing all crushed in his head? Or if there's something else there. And I feel like there might be something else there. And I don't know that it needs to be a whole other villain, like, in and of themselves, fully fledged. Or if it just needs to be somebody just like psychotic manipulator, evil, like, who just wants to kind of, tap the glass and see what happens, sort of a thing. I don't know that it needs to be like, this is Galactus coming in, or, like, set up for the next big new villain. I just think it's probably going to be somebody maybe low level. Maybe it'll be somebody, because I just thought of, like, what about Zemo?
Zemo's going to play more into Falcon and Winter Soldier. Because I think they've teased that, and he's going to get his purple mask and everything. But to kind of go, not to cut you off, but as you were saying it kind of crossed my mind, because we know that these commercials are going to play some importance to the overall story.
The commercials is the main reason why I'm thinking there's at least a little bit something else that set her off.
Well, there's the Hydra soap and the Strucker watch.
Mm-hmm.
And so it could be that someone, like, I agree with you, by the end of Endgame, she does seem to come to kind of terms with her loss, because, you got Clint as they're, coming to terms with Widow's loss. And they're kind of grieving together, but in a good place. But if you're, as someone who always, is truly grieving over a loved one, it doesn't take much if someone can say, hey, here's a way you can bring them back.
Yeah.
And so it could be that there is someone that, like you said, manipulated her to kind of do this ability to then create this fabricated reality and bring Vision back, and then she can live in this perfect, idealized world without ever having to worry about pain, loss, grief, or any of that stuff. And someone that's grieving is going to probably try to take that path. So, yeah, I could totally see that. Like, I think she's responsible for that reality, but it could be some either outside or inside manipulation that is doing this for a very specific reason.
Yeah, and I don't think it needs to be like the next big villain of the MCU. It might be somebody low level that maybe we've already seen, or maybe just that we know about but haven't really, like, actually seen anything. And I kind of feel like maybe it's somebody Hydra, just because, that's where she was, that's where they were created in the MCU. Or I just thought of Zemo because of Sokovia. I'm like, maybe he's there and he's just like, I hate everybody. I don't know.
Well, I kind of want it to be Strucker, because, like, kind of complaint with Age of Ultron was Strucker is a very prominent, like, Hydra villain and a prominent Captain America villain. So, like, when we get introduced to him, he's on screen for like 5 seconds, and then Ultron, quote unquote, has killed him. It's like, well, wait a minute, you got a good actor, Thomas Kretschmann, playing the character, and then you have him on screen for no more than like 5 minutes, and then you also had him in the in credits of what was it? Was it Winter Soldier? And so like you had him kind of set up as this good villain, and you seem to kind of just wasted him, right away. What if Ultron staged that? Like what if he made it look like Strucker was dead and then Strucker? Because really, what motivation does Ultron have to just off Strucker? Other than to kind of tempt the Avengers into action. So I would very much love for that to come back. Now, one other theory I did see too was that these people like Herb and Agnes and like Phil and
Norm.
all them, that they are actually like kind of like in the sense of, oh, why am I Mordo, like from Doctor Strange,
Mm-hmm.
like that they are masters of the mystic arts, but they're bad, and that they might be related. But I really don't. I think that's a bit of a stretch, because like when they're doing all of the identifications of who those people are, they all have like New Jersey's license, and I think they were just really residents of Westview, and since they live there, which kind of go back to episode 3 a little bit. They were there within the inception of this new reality.
Yeah.
And so therefore they're kind of bits of Wanda's subconscious, like that's trying to protect this reality, so that when, Geraldine is popping up and saying things, they're very suspicious. They know she doesn't have a home in this reality. She's not from Westview. So therefore that's kind of why they're having those little talks, and then kind of telling Vision, like, maybe because they sense Vision is part of Wanda's subconscious, but yet there's still that spark of Vision there, that's why he's not just like immediately falling into line, because like you can see he's suspicious as well. So there's something that doesn't feel right to him, even if he's fully there or not fully.
Yeah, he kind of is the one that comes closest to self-aware, I feel like, because it'll be interesting in the next episode to see when they're talking to Monica how much of her was under control, like immediate control. Like, did she know what was going on, or she was only there to like pop up and play her role, and she was more under Wanda's control, I mean to say. And then when Wanda's not directly focused on you as a character, you're kind of off in the town, kind of doing whatever you want. Like, what's the level of, are you totally under control all the time, and things like that. It'll just be interesting to see when they I assume they're going to talk to her next episode.
So I think it's funny you bring that up, because I was thinking about this, and because like you get this idea, like she's a side character in like one of the episodes, because like as Darcy's watching her, she's like, oh, there's Monica, like, mm-hmm. Isn't that her? And she has no speaking role. And then in the next episode, which is like episode 2, she starts speaking, but she's not aware of who she is. Like we haven't gotten that from many of the other characters. Like they seem to know like who, they don't seem to know what they're doing, but who they are in this reality. And so I think like that there's part of this control that is kind of fogging at least Monica's mind. And so Wanda creates the Geraldine character for her, because it's this new person that now she's interacting with, rather than someone who is just like a background character. And then with kind of the consequences of the pregnancy and the birth, that control slips. And that's why when they're talking about the babies, like Monica is coming out front of the Geraldine and going like, wait a minute, you're Wanda, Pietro, Ultron, Avengers. Mm-hmm. Like that's in that. And then once Wanda's realizing that, that's why Wanda does what she does at episode 4 of sending her out of that reality, because she sees the sword symbol. She's seen the helicopter that we find out was actually a drone, which I did love that tie back.
Yeah, that was nice.
That was, and so I think like if it's something that wasn't there initially when she created the reality, she's going, she doesn't have that. She has complete control of everything that was there. Anything that enters, because even like the beekeeper, you know, we don't know how much of him was still him when he, finally passed through
The barrier.
the wall or whatever, and came out. But she was aware enough because of the symbol that there was something wrong there, and that's why she kind of rewound reality and got him out of there, which we never saw exactly what happened to him.
Yeah.
But I did love that his line turned into a jump.
Well, yeah, that's the thing that I wonder about the babies, because when they pull his line back, it's still a jump rope. And when Geraldine gets thrown out, she's
Right.
still in her 70s get up.
So those were things that were actually physical and real. So that is kind of the question. If the babies are to go out,
would they still be there?
Be babies or disappear?
Yeah, that's I'm just wondering.
Question.
Just because we see that, and of course I'm worried about the babies because they're babies, but I'm also like, so Vision? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Because like you said, I think by the end of this, we'll get a definitive he's alive, he's going to be alive, or he's going to be dead. And I don't know necessarily if he is going to be alive, if he'll have that same level of powers or whatever, because technically the stone is gone, and the stone from this timeline is destroyed.
I think he'll have some of his basic ones, like his intangibility and like density increase. But like you can always end up, since he's a synthezoid, he can still manage to shoot lasers out of his like forehead or whatever. But I don't think he's going to be as powerful. But I do want to see him. Like, I don't want him to just be dead by the end of this, because I like Paul Bettany and I like his portrayal, and I think, like, considering how he started out in the MCU as just the voice of Jarvis, and if I remember correctly, he was about done with acting. Like, he wasn't getting roles, which I still don't understand, because he's a very talented actor. And he, they were like, okay, you can do the voice of Jarvis. And he's like, fine, I'll do that on the side. And then they were like, you know what, we're going to make you Vision. And then that kind of like reinvigorated his career and gave it extra life. And I really like that, because I do think he's a very talented actor. I've loved his different portrayals of these kind of sitcom era roles.
Yeah.
That, it's kind of shown his range. And so I don't want him to just, now we're going to leave him dead, and so we're never going to see Vision again, because I feel like that's a disservice to the actor. And I do love his chemistry with Elizabeth. Like, they really, this show has really kind of displayed that classic Scarlet Witch Vision relationship that I kind of wanted to see in the films. And like we've talked about, now we can explore more of the intricacies of their relationships, because we're getting a series that can spend some time, whether to its detriment or to its to its improvement, to finally explore those relationships.
Yeah, I don't know, it all sounds good. I'm excited for all of it. I'm really excited for next episode. I'm kind of disappointed that we're only getting like 8 or 9. I'm like, give me 22, but no, that might be too much. But
I don't think they have the budget for 22.
Yeah, maybe not yet. So do you want to go ahead and rate the episodes? Like, I know that we didn't talk about episode 3 very much, but I mean, I feel like it was another solid outing that was just slightly starting to not necessarily slip, but it was definitely the part where we're all like, okay, we can't take another episode of this. We need more information. So I don't know. Right. I might kind of go ahead and rate it like a 3.5-ish, because it was
that's kind of where I land.
And I feel like it's still solid, so I kind of lean towards 4, but it's not any lower than 3.5.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, and I think I might have said this to you after watching the episode, like, and it's kind of the problem of using this 30-minute format, because first off, you have about 2 to 3 minutes that are not wasted, I guess, but depending on how you're watching it, is used on a recap. And then about another 9 minutes is used on credits. So you've got 11 minutes of your episode, of a 30-minute episode, kind of just wasted. So you've got, 19 minutes of of actual storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And even though we kind of were getting a little bit more mystery in there, I was having some issues with the fact that it wasn't really advancing the story enough. But then you get to that final 3 or 4 minutes of the episode, and that was enough to be like, okay, there's the real hook.
Yeah.
And maybe if I were Marvel, I might have released the first 3 episodes instead of the first 2. And I know I talked about it on Critics Not Cynics that I thought it was a smart idea to release the first 2 episodes because you get a little bit of the hook there.
Mm-hmm.
But the real hook is episode 3. And so if you released the 3 episodes together in conjunction, then I think that they might have not lost the people that were immediately like, there's nothing going on, I don't care, this is stupid, it's silly, there's nothing, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Because really by the end of that episode of 3, you're like, oh, okay, we've now gotten the outside view. And I didn't even know, prior to this, and that's actually, I think it's apt that episode 4 is named We Interrupt This Program.
Yeah.
Because that is what it is. Like, it is that outside perspective. It's almost like, it's us watching the show, and kind of then also these people are trying to figure out what's going on as well. So they're in it with us together. And so I think if you had released the 3 episodes together, and then you got this episode as your first episode 4 as your first standalone episode, people probably would have been less likely to jump off. Now I'm sure it's still doing fine, like streaming wise, but maybe you don't piss off those younger Marvel people who don't have that appreciation for older shows.
Yeah. Well, they got episode 4, so that's my segue. Yes. That's my clever segue. So episode 4, I would definitely go ahead and give this one like a 4.5 because it did everything that we needed it to at this point. Especially, like you said, kind of breaking the fourth wall. We're going we're going outside the Westview, the sitcom. I keep wanting to call it the sitcom, and then my brain's saying alternate reality, and it's trying to smush all the words together at once, and I'm like, no, just the fake place. Fake Westview. But I don't know. I was just so impressed with that one. I really do love the establishment of the timeline that we followed Monica straight from the snap. So I really liked that because I'm one of those like obsessive people when I'm reading books and watching shows. I'm like, what's the time that this is taking place over? Like how many months or whatever? Or is this supposed to be years that these people know each other? Because it is a little easy to forget, especially in a binge culture when you can just sit and watch and watch and watch that sense of time. There is something, I think, to be said for releasing episodes a week because you kind of get to feel a bit of a sense of time pass. So, of course, you can always just wait and binge them all when they're all out. But, I like knowing kind of when everything's taking place. And I really enjoyed episode 4. So I'm hoping that we go pedal to the metal for the rest of these.
Well, it looks like, just kind of seeing the quick promo image from episode 5, it looks like we'll get back into kind of the sitcom reality. And it looks like we'll probably be jumping into the 80s. But I wanted to touch base a little bit on what you said there about kind of the time frame. Because I know... I've kind of updated you. I've been venturing into the High Republic and the Star Wars stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of one of my complaints about the first book is you're not given a definitive time of like, we know that it's the Old Republic and Yoda's younger, but we don't know how old Yoda is. We don't know exactly where this falls in line. And with stuff that they're talking about with the hyperspace lanes, like, to me, it feels like it needs to be even further back than maybe Yoda being 500 years old or something like that. So I agree. Like, you do need to kind of establish that time. And so you as a reader or as a viewer can understand conceptually where things fall into place. And that's where I do think like that would have benefited them a little bit to maybe do that little preface before the first episode of seeing Wanda get Vision's body. Like, we didn't need to be given everything, or even just seeing Wanda going to bed in tears, just like grieving Vision and then waking up in this reality. But that's saying it without having seen the whole season. And so maybe, we'll have something better. Like, maybe my complaint about that will go away by the end of the season. Probably will. considering how episode 4 did set that kind of time and place. And we understand, like, that this is not long after, maybe a month after Endgame, and whether, you know, the events of Spider-Man Far From Home have fallen in there yet, or if it's after this, you know. I would assume it's before, because of the fact that no one's talking about, you know, J. Jonah Jameson releasing the big info. And that was also, like you said, like we talked about the Netflix shows. That was part of my problem, was trying to figure out when these shows were taking place in the greater MCU continuity, because they were marketed as happening within the MCU. And the most we ever heard about was the attack on New York. We never heard about Sokovia. We never heard about Civil War. So when you're only referencing the one event, I'm inclined to believe that all of these events that are occurring are, because I mean they mentioned the raft, so the raft is brought up in there. But I am inclined to believe that the events of those shows all take place prior to Age of Ultron. Yeah. And that's what they'll have to, if they're going to incorporate those characters, which I think they should, because, I mean, the end of Season 2 of Luke Cage set up something very interesting. The ending of Iron Fist Season 2 was setting up something really interesting. I didn't finish Daredevil Season 3. I didn't even start Punisher Season 2. And I didn't even start Jessica Jones Season 3, because by that point they were all releasing. They're like, canceled. And I'm like... So there's no point.
Yeah.
Unless I know that they're going to continue those storylines over on Disney Plus or something, then, you know, maybe I'll go back and I'll revisit them. But, you know, you do need to give your audience some kind of context of the time. So especially if you're canon oriented and continuity oriented, like you and I both are, it's really good for us, because then we can go, okay, this takes place here and this is before there. And, you know, and one of the big things that people like to do with the Marvel movies is try to watch them in the chronological order of the events happening.
Yeah.
I still tend to do order of release, but I will eventually at one point go with, you know, continuity wise of when events happen.
So, Patrick, I think this was a great episode. Do you have any other last comments?
It was a good conversation. Yeah, I really like this discussion, and I really like that, you know, we're looking at these episodes in pairs, and obviously I think we'll cover the next 2 episodes on the Critics Not Cynics podcast, depending on when we get our 100th episode stuff geared and ready to go.
Yeah, did you want to do
one other person to rely on that stuff?
Did you want to do a promo for that yet, or not yet?
Kind of. I just, it's still kind of, you know, once I know he's got everything tested and good to go, I'd be more inclined to kind of say what's going on there. But we'll leave it at this. It will involve YouTube, and it will involve streaming. Live, essentially. It's been great, actually, guesting on someone else's show. It's been a while since I've been on someone else's show, and I don't have to worry about editing anything and uploading it and doing that stuff. But it's been a fun discussion and a fun time.
Well, awesome. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. break down Critics Not Cynics social media for us so that they know where to go, where to follow.
The one thing I was hoping to get away with. You can follow us on Facebook at Critics Not Cynics Podcast. We are on pretty much every podcasting app. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify. We are on Google Play. We are on Amazon Music. We submitted stuff into Audible, but I don't know if we're up on Audible. But pretty much anywhere you can get your podcasts. And we'd appreciate it if you leave us a rate and a review on there. As always, same with Leslie's podcast. You know, if you haven't given her a rating or a review yet, do it, because it helps us get out there and more people find us. I mean, we've just had our podcast start being listened in India and Russia, and it's like, well, that's kind of crazy to think about conceptually. But we are also on Twitter at Critics NT Cynics if you want to follow us on there. We haven't finalized things yet, but we're going to have a social media manager on that at some point. But currently the tweets are from me, and most of them are just retweets. But sometimes, you know, conversations about some grander scale things. And that's pretty much over. So, you can write into our podcast at criticsnotcynics@gmail.com if you have anything you want to discuss or talk about, or just tell us, hey, you like our podcast.
Awesome. Sounds good. So, as you all know, for Leslie Monday Podcast, all of my social media links can be found at my website, lalunsford.com. You can always email at theLeslieMondayPodcast@gmail.com. And yeah, I will be... Oh, the one thing I wanted to remind you all is I will be reposting the poll for which show I'm going to be doing next here on Leslie Monday after The Expanse. So it's between Away, Altered Carbon, and Travelers. Travelers is currently in the lead, and I'm going to leave the poll open for another week before I announce the winner.
It better be Travelers.
yeah. I think the current poll has it in the lead by 2 or 3 votes, and then I actually got some in-person people, who listen to the podcast that just talked to me in person who said they wanted Travelers. So I feel like it's probably going to be Travelers. And I also wanted to, FYI, I did say in the title and everything that I do review books as well, and I finally finished one. Yay! Cheers! So I will be reviewing that book. It'll be its own separate podcast, and I will also be looking into getting the transcript of it onto Goodreads, too. So if you like to read your reviews on Goodreads, I will be getting the transcript of my podcast over there. So if you've all hung around this long, thank you so much. You must be dedicated fans. We hope you have a great weekend. If you're anywhere that's getting the White Death this weekend, stay safe and stay warm. Patrick, thanks for being here, and have a great one.
Thanks for having me.